Welcome. My name is Terry Kimball, and I'm the President and CEO here at the Chandler Chamber. And I am very pleased to have with me Sean Bowie, who is running for the LD 18 Senate seat. So Sean, tell me a little bit about why you're running for this seat.
First of all, Terry, thank you for having me. I'm running for this race because I think, like a lot of people in Chandler, I've been frustrated with our state legislature and really frustrated with the cuts to our schools and a lot of the decisions that they've made. So for me personally, I grew up in Chandler, grew up in our local schools here. So I think with my background, I think with my experience in the policy community, I think I could be a good fit for our community in the state Senate and really advocate for the issues that are important to us, not just economic development, but also education, all the way from K-12 up to our universities. So that's the reason why I got into this race, and I really just want to fight for our community and our district in the state Senate on those issues that are so important to us.
Well, great. Thank you for joining me.
Mm-hmm.
Education is very important, and Chandler uses that as an economic development tool. How do you think you can how can you impact education at the state legislature?
Well, for me, it's about electing legislators who are going to make education their number one priority. And I think we've cut a lot of our investment in education really for the last 10 years. So I think we've created a really good business environment that allows businesses to grow and thrive. And I think the one thing that's missing is a long-term commitment to education. So I think a lot of legislators get to the Capitol, they only think about getting reelected, they think about the next 2 years. I really want to build an economy that's strong 5, 10, 20 years from now. And for me, that starts with education. I work at ASU, so these are issues that I work on every day, and I really see the impact that our legislature has had on our universities when I walk into work every day. So for me, it's making those targeted investments in our universities, our community colleges. We have some great community colleges here in the area. Those technical training programs that are really certifying and training our workers for a lot of these jobs that are coming to Chandler now. These companies are coming here and they want to hire people with these skill sets, and our technical training programs have really been cut a lot over the years. So for me, I want to take a long-term economic development approach, and I think a big part of that that's missing right now is a commitment to education. So for me, it's making education the number one priority when it comes to the state budget, and really making those targeted investments so 5, 10, 20 years from now, our economy is growing, it's creating more good-paying jobs, and our state is thriving. And I think we can do that if we elect legislators who make this their number one priority.
Great. Arizona, other than education, what do you feel is one of the other biggest challenges that's facing Arizona?
Well, we're a state that's growing. We've been growing for many decades, and I think infrastructure is really important. I think long-term infrastructure planning, not just roads and bridges, but water is a big issue. I'm really concerned about water in the next 10 or 20 years. I want to make sure that we plan appropriately and really have a long-term strategy. It's the legislature working with cities like Chandler, it's working with county governments, and really making those investments so we're not caught flat-footed and have to do rationing or have to really make some emergency expenditures. So for me, it's just having a long-term approach. That's what businesses do. And I think we need to take that same thinking into government and really think about more than just, well, how do I get reelected? It's more about how can we make sure that Chandler and Phoenix and Tempe are thriving 5, 10, 20 years from now.
Great. The recent pass in 123 was a small bit of relief for schools. What are some of the other strategic things that you think need to happen?
Well, even with Prop 123, we still rank 48th in the country in K-12 investment. And I talked to a lot of teachers, a lot of parents in our community here in Chandler, and there's still 35, 40 kids in a classroom. We have the highest teacher turnover rate in the country. And we have a lot of great schools in this area. I grew up here in Chandler in the Kyrene School District. And I think we have strong schools, but they're under threat. And I think we need to really make long-term investments in education the number one priority at the state capitol. We have a really great business environment here in Chandler. A lot of companies are moving here. Intel, I went to elementary school right across the street from Intel at Murata Elementary. So we have a lot of great companies here in the area. But I think when companies are looking at areas and looking at moving, education is a big part of that. Alliance Bank just did a survey and they asked CEOs, what are you looking at? What's the most important issue for you when you're looking at locating to a city? And education was the number one response. So I think we're not doing enough. And I think we have the resources at the Capitol. We've had some surpluses. We have a rainy day fund. I want to use a small portion of that to really make these long-term investments. That's what the business community wants. I think it's what voters want in our community. And I want to take those concerns and those issues and fight for them at the state Capitol.
within the next couple of years, we will be probably facing that fiscal cliff again. Talk to me about some of your plans on how to address that.
Well, it's important because we have to balance our budget every year. And, I think if we make some of these short-term investments, we can grow the economy. And it's about getting more businesses here. It's about growing some of these businesses, including here in Chandler. It's the biodesign industry, it's tech, it's research and development. A lot of these areas, we have a lot of potential there. And I think now, at the time where the economy is growing, we still have room to grow now, but I think now that we have some resources, now we can really make some of these investments. So we're not as reliant, say, on the housing industry as we were during the last downturn. So I think if we make these investments, I think we're going to be in a strong position. So when that downturn does come, we have a broader economy that's not just minimum wage job, it's jobs that are paying a good wage, that families are moving here. And I think once we do that, I think we'll be in a good position economically to where we can weather a downturn much better than we did back in 08, 09, which led to a lot of jobs being lost, a lot of cuts in education. So I think if we work now, I think we'll be in a better position when that downturn does come.
There's been huge sweeps over the past several years in HERF funds, highway user revenue funds. Transportation's a key component here in Chandler, especially when attracting larger companies. Give me your thoughts on that.
Well, this is something that the legislature has been doing that I'm opposed to. I think sweeping these funds is, again, it's very short-sighted. It's an area where the legislature can come in, just kind of raid the funds and to cover for their mistakes. And I think transportation, like I said earlier, is an important long-term issue when it comes to roads, to freeways, to bridges, potholes. So for me, raiding those funds is the wrong approach. And in the state Senate, I'd be opposed to further raids because these are things that have to be paid for. And the legislature coming in and just sweeping the funds is really an indictment of their job performance and that they're not providing the revenue that we need for education and healthcare, and they're just taking it from cities and local governments. So for me, I think it's the wrong approach, and I would certainly fight any efforts in the Senate next year to raid that fund again.
Out of everything that you stand for, what is, other than education, what's that other key component that you feel that we need to hit in 2017?
I think it's really additional economic development. I think we've done well. Cities like Chandler are doing well. Tempe is growing by a lot, so is Phoenix. But I think that paired with education, I really think is the best way to move our economy forward. We have very low tax rates compared to a lot of the states that border us. We have one of the 10 lowest state income tax rates in the country. So I think we're competitive there. And I think we can grow further and have more economic development if we have that commitment to education, we have the commitment to transportation. It's just that long-term certainty. If we elect legislators who are going to make economic development, education, transportation their number one focuses, I think more businesses would say, okay, it's time to invest in Arizona. It's time to invest in the Phoenix area. And I think all those three things together, if we have legislators who are going to be reasonable, moderate, bipartisan, work across the aisle, I think we can grow the state even more, and we can have more businesses moving, say, to Chandler. So I think that would be my approach in the state Senate.
Healthcare is also a big issue that when we hear that companies are relocating here, education, workforce development, and healthcare. Healthcare is a very strong component here in Chandler. With some of the new federal mandates, it has put Arizona in a very difficult situation. How should the state legislature weigh in or not weigh in on that, on healthcare issues?
Well, a lot of these healthcare issues are because of the Affordable Care Act, and I think we've seen, the Affordable Care Act needs reform. And I think that a lot of those changes come at the federal level, but the state potentially could intervene and make it even worse. So for me, I think it's working with our federal delegation. It's making sure that we can reform the Affordable Care Act in a way, because the Affordable Care Act has expanded coverage to tens of millions of people, but it's not perfect. And it is desperately in need of reform. So I think working with our federal delegation to Congress, the Medicaid expansion that passed a couple years ago, I think was a good thing. And that's something that's impacted a lot of families here in Chandler. So I think taking some of these steps to reform the ACA and building on the Medicaid expansion what we have in place, I think is the right approach. And I think that will also, paired with the economic development and the education, I think that'll imbue some certainty into the economic development environment and really help our state grow.
We have two very important propositions that are currently on the ballot, Prop 205 and Prop 206. Share with me some of your views on both of them.
So Prop 205 is the marijuana legalization.
Correct.
I'm personally opposed to that. That's something where I disagree with many in my party. But I think what we've seen in Colorado and Washington and some of these other states, it's risky for me. And I'm someone who, when I look at policy, I really like to study the issues, examine it from all sides, really look at how it's going to impact our cities and how it's going to impact people in my district. And for me, what I've seen in Colorado, I'm not ready to support that. I have a lot of questions about marijuana use on brain development among teenagers, for example. A lot of issues around taxation, where that money's going to go. So me personally, I'm opposed to 205. 206 for me is not perfect. I think when we're talking about the minimum wage, I think there's a lot of people in our district who do need a raise. The way that this proposition was written, it mandates the minimum wage be the same statewide, which I think is not the way I would do it. I think certainly you don't want to have the same minimum wage in Phoenix as you do in Cottonwood, for example.
Correct.
But I think overall, I think Prop 206 has a lot of good parts to it, and I like the gradualness of it. It's not, I wouldn't support $15 an hour, for example, but I think $10 and then eventually $12, I think that's a step in the right direction. So it's something personally that I will support. But certainly down the road, I think we need to take a better look at minimum wage and look at it more on a cost of living scale instead of just a blanket wage statewide. So I do support 206.
There's been a lot of talk about potential overall business tax reform here in the state. Share with me your views on that.
Well, I'm always open to tax reform, and I'm not someone who's going to be automatically opposed to any tax reductions. But for me, it's about creating the best environment that we can for the business community. And I think we're very competitive with states like California, states like Colorado. But what I'm seeing a lot of other states do, they have similar tax rates and environments, but they're investing in education. So my economic development perspective, what I would do is I wouldn't put all of our eggs just into the tax basket. I think it also has to be paired with investments in education. So for me, if there are ways for us to introduce new tax incentives for certain industries, like this is something I've talked to the Arizona Technology Council about, there are certain tax incentive programs that I think are working, and we have data that shows that. So if I have data in front of me that says we have a tax credit program that's working really well, by all means, let's keep doing it. So I'm all for tax reform, and I'm all for creating an environment where businesses can thrive. But I think if you talk to a lot of these business owners, and I'm sure you are, a lot of them say, well, we don't have the workers with the skills to do these jobs. And I think that comes back to education. So for me, it's a two-pronged approach. It's let's create a tax environment that works for everybody, but let's also invest in education. So we have those programs that trains our workers so that they can then take those jobs that are in these businesses that are moving here. So I'm all for tax reform. I just want to look at the details first.
What really makes you stand out from your opponent?
For me, I think it's my approach. I'm someone who, I am a Democrat, but for me, it's not about what's best for my party. It's about what's best for the community, what's best for our schools. I disagree with my party on a whole host of issues, but what I'm always going to take to the Capitol every day is what's going to move Chandler forward, what's going to move Ahwatukee forward. I'm someone who wants to work across the aisle. I want to work with the governor. I want to do what's best for our state. And for me, that's the most important thing at the end of the day. So I think my bipartisan, moderate approach, someone who's going to work well with others, someone who's going to reach across the aisle and say, hey, I have a great idea. What do you think of this? Let's see if we can move this forward. That's rooted in growing up in this community and living here for over 20 years, going to school here. My family still lives here. And I think that's what our community wants. And I think that's what they want to see in their state legislators. So that's the approach that I plan to take to the Senate next year.
Great information. Is there anything else you want to talk to our viewing audience about that they really need to know about you before they cast that vote on November 8th?
Well, first thing to know is, yes, November 8th is the election. I would love to have your support. I'm someone who grew up in Chandler. I think I share a lot of the values that many people in our community do. And for me, at the end of the day, it's about what's going to move our community forward, what's going to move our schools forward. A lot of these issues are personal for me because I grew up here, I grew up in our local schools. I want what's best for our children and what's best for our community. So I would encourage you to visit my website, which is SeanBowie.foraz.com, and certainly would appreciate your support on or before November 8th.
Great. Make sure that you get out to vote. There's still time, and you can do early voting, and there's several sites that you can early vote at, as well as on November 8th. So make sure that you exercise that right to vote. We'll be hearing next from the opponent for this, so keep in tune and so that you can make an informed decision.